we? Would we allow Novak Djokovic to take part at Wimbledon if he wasn't vaccinated?
Sorry, Kate, you were asking about Novak Djokovic and Wimbledon. Well, again, there's as we've just heard, there's a complex process going on in Australia. We have to respect the integrity of that process. And Wimbledon is some months away. The thing I would say to anyone is that it is good to get vaccinated. It is good for you. It is good for others, good for society. But with the specific case of Mr. Djokovic, well, I'll leave it to the Australian authorities to decide that for the moment. And as I say, there are plenty of sporting highlights before we reach Wimbledon.
Bit of swerve on that backhand. Are we ready to live with COVID here in the UK?
I think we are getting readier to live with COVID, absolutely. I think that what's been striking is the success of the booster campaign. While there are, with Novak Djokovic, one or two high-profile figures who themselves haven't been vaccinated, the overwhelming good sense of the British people has meant that millions of us have been vaccinated, have had our booster, and as a result we've been playing our part in making sure that we relieve the pressure on the NHS and make sure that care is there for those who need it.
And we're ready to cut the isolation period from 7 to 5 days.
Sorry, Kay, I just missed that because I'm afraid that I think I heard your producer in my ear rather than you. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I was just asking, as a result, are we saying that we are ready to cut the isolation period from 7 days to 5 days?
Well, we always keep these things under review. And the most important thing, I think, is to ensure that we are in a position to protect the NHS and to protect public services. So we, at the moment, are in a position where we've reduced the isolation period, as you know, from 10 to 7 days. We'll keep that under review, but it will be the Health Secretary and the Prime Minister who will make any announcement in due course, not me.
Does sound as though the Cabinet is open to it, though.
Well, we always keep things under review because we're always guided by the facts, by the science, and by changing circumstances. So I think it's striking to note that in the United Kingdom overall, particularly in England, we have one of the most open regimes, one of the, essentially, one of the most liberal approaches of any country in Europe. But we also need to balance that with a determination to ensure that we are not overwhelming the NHS. And your question gives me an opportunity just to say thank you to everyone who's been working on the NHS front line for nearly 2 years now to deal with this epidemic. Their hard work, their dedication, their sacrifices are amazing, and we're all in their debt.
Yep, we certainly are. You say we're guided by the science as far as being led by the government is concerned. One wonders how much notice we should be taking of the modelling. The latest modelling that we saw from the London School of Tropical Medicine, they were suggesting that worst case scenario, we would see something like 75,000 deaths from the Omicron variant by the end of April. The latest figures that we had from the 23rd of December, particularly for Omicron, were 14 deaths as opposed to 75,000. Isn't it time we stopped going with the worst case scenario?
Well, I think we need to look at a range of scenarios, and it's always the case that we look at different academic models. Models, by their very definition, are not predictions. They just run through what is likely to happen. And again, at different stages in this pandemic...
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr Gove, but likely to happen, 14 deaths as opposed to 75,000. Come on.
Sorry, Kate, once again, I'm afraid I heard your producer or one of the excellent technical team in Sky just speaking in my ear there, so I missed your question. I do apologise.
Not at all. I'm sorry about that. I was saying there's a big difference between 14 deaths and 75,000. Some people would say that potentially was scaremongering.
No, I don't think it's scaremongering at all, and no one is setting out to scaremonger. What we are always setting out to do is to ensure that we are in a position to model a range of scenarios and to be ready for those different outcomes. I think it would be a mistake not to model some scenarios where the NHS is under very severe pressure so that we can make sure that the resources are there. I think it would be irresponsible not to have a range of scenarios, because we need to be in a position where we can cope with however the virus mutates, however the epidemic develops, and that's why it is right that we have these scenarios. But it's also the case, and you're right here as well, that we stress that these are models, they are not predictions.
How long will lateral flow tests be free?
As long as we need them.
And how long do you think that might be?
Again, one of the things about the pandemic is that it's been impossible to predict with certainty throughout, but it is the case that in this country lateral flow tests are free, and unlike in many other jurisdictions, they're a vital tool in making sure that we can curb the spread of the infection, and also that people who need to isolate do so. But as you pointed out right at the very beginning of our conversation, we are moving to a situation, we're not there yet, but we are moving to a situation where it is possible to say that we can live with COVID and that the pressure on the NHS and on vital public services is abating. But it's absolutely vital to recognise that we are not there yet. And as the Health Secretary has reminded us, there will be some difficult weeks ahead, and that is why we all need to continue to test, continue, if we are positive, to isolate, and continue broadly to support the NHS as it goes through a challenging period, but one in which the frontline professionals are doing an amazing job.
So we are considering phasing out lateral flow tests, but not for the coming weeks as we continue to try to deal with the Omicron variant and indeed the Delta variant that is still around over the next few weeks. So not for the next few weeks, in other words, is that right?
Well, as the Prime Minister and others have said, we will do whatever it takes.
Talk to me about why you're here today, which is cladding. £4 billion to help those people that are basically stuck in homes that are unsafe or they can't sell them. Is it going to be a voluntary scheme for these developers to get involved?
Well, we want to say to developers, and indeed to all those who have a role to play in recognising their responsibility, that we want to work with them. But if it's the case that it's necessary to do so, then we will use legal means and ultimately, if necessary, the tax system in order to ensure that those who have deep pockets, those who are responsible for the upkeep of these buildings pay, rather than the leaseholders, the individuals who in the past were being asked to pay with money they didn't have for a problem that they did not cause.
So you're saying that there could be a developer's tax and you will bring in the full weight of the law to make sure that they cough up?
Yes, and I think it's important to look at this in a balanced way. There are some developers, some people in the property business, who have been stepping up to the plate already, living up to their responsibilities, removing dangerous cladding, making sure that buildings are safe. I applaud that work, but there are others who still have more to do, and it's a straightforward question. Should it be those with the big bucks, the big profits, who have been responsible for the construction of these buildings and who are the ultimate owners of these buildings, or should it be individuals who have worked hard in order to get a mortgage and who are now being saddled with costs for faults that were not their responsibility? If you put the question like that, then I think there can only be one answer.
What about people in buildings that have got the challenges with problems other than cladding, insulation, wooden balconies, etc., etc.? The DCLG committee estimated sorting out fire defects could cost something like £15 billion. Are you going to be looking at that as well?
We are. I think the thing about the costs there is that we've just been talking about modelling and estimates and so on. I don't think the costs would be anything like that, but I do think it is necessary to make sure that that buildings are safe. I think it's also important to bear in mind, though, that the overwhelming majority of buildings which are not high-rise buildings are safe. And it's important that we get a proper sense of proportion, that we make sure, firstly, that we get rid of dangerous cladding, that we make those buildings which are currently unsafe totally safe, but at the same time, with other buildings that have been considered to be in scope of particular types of work, it's important that we also get a sense of proportion back. Because one of the problems that many people living in flats face is that at the moment there is a question mark hanging over the safety of their flats. That means they can't get a mortgage, or others who want to buy the flat can't get a mortgage, and they can't move on. And what we want to do is to tackle the real dangers and restore a sense of proportion.
And in addition to that, they're struggling to pay their energy bills. Should we be cutting VAT on energy bills?
Well, again, I think it's important that we look at a range of options here in order to help. And the government already provides additional support for those who are in particular difficulties. We have warm homes payments. There are other ways in which we support people. So I think it's important when we're thinking about how we help people that we look at ways in which we can target our support most effectively on those most in need.
Is that a yes or a no to cutting VAT on bills as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think we should always seek to cut taxes whenever we can, but also it's important when we are providing support for people that we also target it most on those who need it most.
And so cutting VAT on energy bills is something that you would support?
Well, in my view, the more we can cut taxes, the better. But at this point, I think that the prudent and the responsible thing to do is to recognise that we need to take a balanced approach. And a balanced approach means that when we can support, we provide support most to those in the most difficult circumstances.
So particularly on energy bills at the moment, given that some people could find themselves with a bill going up more than 600 quid?
Well, I think that's precisely why we should be concentrating our support most on those with the least income, the least wherewithal in order to be able to meet those and other bills. And that's what we do. We target support, whether it is through warm homes payments or through other interventions, on those who are most in need. And I think most people would recognise that if we do have ultimately, it's all taxpayers' money. If we do have taxpayers' money to be able to provide people with support, then it should be directed towards those who are in the toughest circumstances.
Talk to me about the parties that seem to keep going on at number 10 Downing Street. It looks as though there were more taking place on the 20th of May last year. Were you invited?
I can't remember what I was doing on the 20th of May last year. Kay.
You'd have remembered if you were at a party, though. How many parties
sadly,
at number 10 did you go to last year?
No. No, very, very few, Kay. And
you went to some?
Two things that I would say. No. I think it's important to stress that all of these matters are being investigated by Sue Gray, a brilliant civil servant, someone who will investigate without fear or favour. Sue is a permanent secretary in the department where I'm a minister. I don't think it would be proper for me to say anything other than everyone knows that she is a person of great integrity, someone who will investigate this remorselessly and whose conclusions we should wait for. And until we get those conclusions, I shouldn't attempt to preempt it, and nor should anyone else.
OK, let me just ask you one final question before I let you go. More than 1 million people have now signed a petition, I should say, saying that they don't want Tony Blair to receive a knighthood. Why are they all wrong?
Well, I don't want to get into an argument with 1 million people now, Kay, but one of the things that I would say is that while Tony Blair is a Prime Minister whose record, as any Prime Minister who was in power for 10 years it has a record which divides, I think we should all recognise that he served this country, he continues to serve this country, and I don't think it's possible for anyone to be in a position like that without attracting controversy and without inviting opposition. But for myself, if I look back at Tony Blair's record, while there are aspects of it with which I can disagree, I think any fair-minded person would say that he was an outstanding statesman and reformer, and as a Prime Minister who put public service first, this recognition from Her Majesty is entirely appropriate.
Which particular aspects did you disagree with?
Well, we could be here for another hour or so if we ran through all of the things which Tony Blair did with which I disagreed, and those things which he did which I think were worthwhile. I think it's more important to accentuate the positive in anyone's record, and so I would say that the establishment of academy schools and more choice in education was a good thing. I think it was also the case that the approach he took on being determined to crack down on crime and antisocial behaviour, even if it wasn't always delivered effectively, was right. And I also think that his recognition of the importance of a country like the United Kingdom being on the side of liberty internationally was also right.
OK. Sorry about the technical challenges. I do apologise for that. One way of getting around that, of course, is for you to come into the studio next time. So I look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you.